The movie opens with Marin practicing the piano after school. Just then, her friend shows up, informing her that she won't have her picture in the yearbook since she didn't take it even after being reminded thrice. Then, she invites Marin to a sleepover at her place. However, Marin is hesitant due to her strict father who would never allow her. Her friend suggests that she sneak out once her dad has gone to bed. Later, Marin's father picks her up after school and compliments her on her driving skills. After dinner, Marin washes her face and discreetly pockets the keys to the window as she heads back to her room. She bids her dad goodnight, and he locks her door from the outside. When the coast is clear, Marin unlocks the window and carefully climbs out, making her way to her friend's house. At the sleepover, one of the girls asks Marin where she had lived before moving here. Unfortunately, Marin has no recollection of her past. Her father has never shared anything about her mother, and she possesses no photos or memories. Meanwhile, the other two friends finish painting each other's nails, and Marin's friend extends her hand to have her nails painted next. Once the task is completed, she shows it to Marin. In a swift moment, Marin grips her friend's hand and, to everyone's horror, bites off her ring finger. The room erupts into screams of agony. Terrified, Marin flees from the scene as the girls continue to scream. She rushes back home and pounds her fists on the door. Her father wakes up and quickly understands what must have occurred. In a panic, he hastily begins packing their belongings, urging Marin to gather her essentials within 3 minutes. They must leave immediately before the police arrive. Marin wakes up at her new home. She calls out to her father, but gets no answer. Frantically, she searches for him everywhere, but he's nowhere to be found. On the table, she discovers a tape and an envelope containing money and a certificate. She plays the tape, where her father explains that he's leaving, just like her mother did. Overwhelmed with grief, Marin stops listening to it when her father says that he can't help her anymore. Eventually, she gathers herself and makes peace with her situation. She takes her birth certificate and, seeing her mother's name written there, makes a firm decision to search for her. Determined, she heads to the information center, approaching the lady at the reception desk. Marin points to a location on the map. The lady assists Marin but seems skeptical of her attitude. Marin quickly shuts her down by stating that she's 18. She also shows her birth certificate as confirmation. Slightly annoyed, the lady finally relents and informs her that the ride to Columbus will cost $49. Without hesitation, Marin pays the fare. Boarding the bus, she settles into her seat and listens to the recording her father left behind, which reveals her first time eating human flesh. When Marin was merely 3 years old, she attacked her babysitter, Penny. Upon returning home, her father discovered Penny lying on the bathroom floor, her body covered in blood, with a gruesome wound on her neck. He had then noticed Marin's mouth stained with blood and discovered a soft, gum-like substance lodged in her cheek. It was part of an ear. Grateful that Penny hadn't been wearing any earrings, preventing a potential choking hazard, her father swiftly took action. He disposed of the nanny's body, packed their belongings, and abandoned their real name. The incident remained concealed, as the body was never discovered. For a few years, life seemed relatively calm. He believed Marin would be able to control her urges in public, especially as she prepared to start school. But he had been completely wrong. Marin removes her headphones as she has finally arrived at her destination. Using her luggage as a pillow, she settles on a bench and starts to read a book. Suddenly, she's interrupted when the rain begins to pour. She takes shelter nearby, only to notice a man observing her. Marin musters the courage to inquire if he's waiting for the bus. Startled, the man confesses that he was looking for her. Terrified, she questions whether she knows him. He assures her that they are strangers, yet he can discern her scent. Marin contemplates leaving, but the man interjects her, asking when she last ate. Bewildered, she wonders how he could possibly detect such a thing, to which the creep reveals that one's sense of smell becomes more polished with more experience. He calls himself a fellow eater and asks her to follow him. He can get dinner for both. I wonder, what's for dinner? Remaining cautious, Marin grasps a rock and discreetly stashes it in her pocket, ready to defend herself if needed. The man introduces himself as Sullivan, but his friends call him Sully. He assures her that she has nothing to worry about, as he never devours his own kind. Once inside, Sully retrieves a whole raw chicken from the freezer, skillfully slicing it apart. Marin, now feeling a sense of relief, confesses that she believed herself to be the only one of her kind. During the conversation, she gradually realizes that the house does not belong to Sully. He asks her to find that out herself, prompting her to use her sense of smell. Upstairs, an elderly lady lies on the floor, gasping for her final breaths. She immediately tries to find a way to help her, but Sully stops her. He tells her that this is their way of survival, as she needs to feed before she can't control her urges anymore. Realizing the brutality of her future, she locks herself in a room and cries. After a while, she comes out, and together they devour the old woman. After completing their meal, Sully retrieves a pouch from his box and shows a long braid made from the hair of his victims. Marin inquires about Sully's first time. He confesses that he consumed his grandfather. Her mother had walked in on the scene and cleaned up his mess by lying about the incident being an animal attack. However, when Sully eventually fled home, no one came searching for him. Later, when Sully is taking a shower, Marin uses the opportunity to swiftly board a bus. Through the window, she finds Sully gazing at her in disappointment. On the bus, she resumes listening to her dad's tape. He talks about a missing boy during a camping trip she attended at the age of 8. Tragically, the missing boy's body was later found, but authorities ruled it as an accident. Her father regrets allowing her to go. He discloses that while unsure if he loves her as a father should, he certainly doesn't hate her. This incident prompted him to finally stop her from attending any social events or gatherings. Marin reaches Indiana. At a store, while stealing products, she notices a guy glancing at her. Suddenly, a customer begins harassing a woman. Appalled, Marin steps forward, but the same guy from before intervenes and takes the rude man outside. Marin successfully steals her necessities and exits the store, only to be greeted by a familiar scent. Following the scent, she discovers the blood-stained guy emerging from an abandoned building. He casually passes her and informs her about the location, lest she wants to feed too. Instead, she follows the guy. She tells him that she has smelled him in the store, further asking for help as she's new to this. Together, they steal the dead guy's truck and go on a journey. We come to know that the guy's name is Lee. Lee and Marin find the dead man's address and take shelter at his place for the night. At the house, Lee stumbles upon his favorite song record and dances along to it. Caught up in the moment, he hops in front of a mirror and notices bloodstains on his clothes. He abruptly leaves to take a shower. On the other side, Marin experiences a dream in which her father wishes her a happy birthday. Then the next day, Lee and Marin head to a nearby diner for breakfast. During their meal, Marin shares her encounter with Sully, whom she found creepy. After a long day of driving, they spend the night in the truck. However, their original plan to go to Lee's house in Kentucky takes a detour when he takes Marin to his late aunt's house instead. As they settle in, Lee explains to Marin that his house is not far, but he must remain hidden from town. Lee leaves to meet his sister, Kayla. When he comes back, they have dinner together. However, Kayla shows up shortly after, angrily pounding on the door. She expresses her frustration with Lee's constant absence, fearing that he will vanish just like their father. Assuring Kayla that he is not like their father, Lee promises to return in 2 weeks. After Kayla departs, Lee suggests to Marin that they should leave that very night. He concocts a plan to steal money from the cash drawer of a nearby slaughterhouse cafe. They manage to carry out the plan smoothly, and Lee successfully retrieves enough cash to sustain them for a few days. Then, he takes Marin to the area where animals are kept. They sit there, engrossed in conversation about their lives. Marin talks about her mother and her plan to visit Minnesota, her mom's birth town. Their conversation deepens, and they both share a heartfelt kiss. The rain pours heavily on the next day. They park their truck near a camping site and engage in a conversation about their experiences. Amid their discussion, a car approaches them, causing them to be on alert. Lee gets out of the truck and walks towards the other car, where 2 men named Brad and Jake greet them. They seem to be eaters too. Lee introduces himself as Leon and Marin as Maggie. He's still a bit tense, but Brad and Jake assure them that they have come to share some beer and enjoy each other's company. They sit around the campfire drinking and chatting. During the conversation, Jake reveals that Brad isn't an eater. He willingly indulges in it. Jake also mentions something intriguing about full bones, which catches Lee's attention. Jake describes it as eating the whole thing, bones and all. He compares the feeling to the first time they started, but Marin finds the idea disgusting. She walks away in disapproval, disturbed by the fact that Brad had chosen this path for himself. Later, when Brad and Jake fall asleep, Lee and Marin quietly get into their truck to leave. However, Jake wakes up and immediately tries to chase after them, but thankfully, they manage to get away. The following day, they arrive in Iowa. They decide to take a break and stop at an amusement park. While on the Ferris wheel, Marin states that she's hungry. Lee scans the surroundings and spots his target, a booth worker who mistreated a kid that had won a game. Lee flirts with him a little and gets him to meet him after his shift ends. While waiting, Maren and Lee listen to her dad's tape, where he expresses his longing for her to be an ordinary girl. Maren stops the recording immediately. Just then, the booth worker arrives and Lee leaves Maren, asking her to wait for him in the truck. Maren observes as Lee meets the worker and their interaction becomes more intimate. Eventually, they both disappear into the bushes. After some time passes, Maren follows them and witnesses Lee attacking the worker. Lee starts feeding on the body and signals Maren to join him. Once they finish, Maren takes the worker's car while Lee drives the truck. They head to the address mentioned on the worker's license, but find the lights on. Maren volunteers to check it out since Lee is still covered in blood. She hides behind the trees in the yard and sees a woman holding a baby. The sight leaves her stunned. She runs back to the car. When Lee asks her what happened, she lowers the sun shield, revealing a collection of pictures of the worker's wife and child. Lee is equally shocked, but tries to soothe Maren's distress by repeating that they didn't know. They abandon the car and drive away in the truck. Lee attempts to talk to Maren, but she is still distraught. She worries that they lack remorse for their actions and fears the consequences they will face for the rest of their lives. Finally, they reach Minnesota, and with the aid of a telephone directory, Maren tracks down her grandmother, Barbara. Lee drives her to the listed address, and Maren spots an older woman outside the house. Maren gathers her courage and approaches the woman, asking if she is Barbara. However, Barbara seems disinterested initially. Only when Maren pleads does Barbara invite her inside. Barbara shares the unexpected news that Janelle, Maren's mother, and Leonard, her dad, had never married. Furthermore, she was unaware of having a granddaughter. Barbara explains that she and Leonard had adopted Janelle. Maren urges Barbara to reveal more about her mother, but Barbara appears guarded. Eventually, she yields to Maren's persistence and reveals that her mother is admitted to the state hospital in Fergus Falls. Immediately, Maren leaves to visit her mother. Lee drives her swiftly to the Fergus Falls infirmary. Maren enters the facility alone, where she meets a nurse who guides her to her mother. Her mother has lost both arms and is mentally unstable. The nurse presents a letter addressed to her, stating that her mother had known that she would come someday. Within the letter, Janelle explains that if Maren has come to see her, it is because her father broke his promise. Janelle confesses that Leonard didn't know what she was until Maren was born. Janelle never wanted to hurt Leonard because she loved them both deeply, yet she believes there is one final act she must undertake. Suddenly, Janelle lunges at Maren, attempting to harm her. The nurse swiftly intervenes, taking control of the situation and urging her to leave the room. She rushes outside and confides in Lee that her own mother had tried to kill her. She resents her mother for not being there for her and for concealing the truth about their differences. Lee tries to calm Maren down and make her understand the gravity of their situation, but she remains resolute. As Maren drives, Lee dozes off in the car. She stops at a gas station, intending to refuel the truck. Taking out the stolen money they obtained from the cafe, she places it on the dashboard and leaves. Later, when Lee discovers her absence, he desperately tries to search for her. Meanwhile, Maren encounters Sully again, who admits that he has been following her since their last interaction and tries to persuade her to join him. Feeling extremely creeped out, Maren rejects his proposal, provoking Sully's anger. He shouts profanities at her and angrily drives away. Then, Maren enters a nearby diner and destroys the tape. Now, we follow Lee, who's dreaming of a brutal nightmare. Immediately, he wakes up and decides to call his sister. He informs her that he's coming back home. He's overwhelmed with emotions as he realizes he is finally returning home after months. A few months later, Maren pays a visit to Lee's hometown. She meets Kayla, hoping to learn about Lee's whereabouts. Kayla reveals that their mother has been relentless in her pursuit of Lee, prompting him to set up camp by the lake. She also says that Lee has remained in town this long in the hopes that Maren would reach out to him. She also opens up about their abusive father. One fateful day, Kayla tried to intervene during a heated altercation between their father and Lee. At that moment, something within Lee snapped. He implored Kayla to call the police, and when they arrived, they found Lee drenched in blood and their father's truck missing. Rumors swirled, suggesting that Lee had done away with their father. However, subsequent investigations cleared Lee of any charges as the blood turned out to be his own. Finally, Maren goes to the lake to meet Lee. They immediately hug each other to reconcile, giving their relationship another try. They decide to journey together to the west. During their journey, Lee reveals to Maren that after Kayla had gone to call the authorities, their father, consumed by rage, attempted to attack him. Lee struck his father's head forcefully with an ashtray and then took his body to an abandoned barn. He left him there for 3 days. Following his release from police custody, Lee returned to the barn, fully aware that his father knew what awaited him. Overwhelmed by sorrow, Lee reveals that if it hadn't been for Kayla, he would have succumbed to his despair. However, Marin interrupts him, assuring him that she would have done the same in his shoes. She emphasizes that his actions were driven by a desire to protect those he loved. At that moment, she professes her love for him. Determined to begin a new life together, they resolve to settle down, find jobs, and lead a normal life. They have finally begun to lead a beautiful life. They have jobs and a beautiful home. One day, Marin returns home to a peculiar scent. As she enters her bedroom, her eyes land on an unfamiliar bag placed on her bed. Suddenly, Sully pounces on her. He brandishes a knife, threatening her into silence. Sully disgustingly explains that he has unfinished business with her. However, he fails to notice Lee, who's behind him. In a swift move, Lee covers Sully's face with a plastic wrap, attempting to disarm him. Marin bites Sully's hand, causing him to drop the knife. Acting quickly, she grabs it and stabs him repeatedly. Together, Marin and Lee manage to drag Sully's lifeless body to the bathtub. There, Marin retrieves an organ from the stab wounds. Lee, exhausted and panting heavily, emerges from the tub. Meanwhile, Marin curiously examines Sully's satchel and discovers Kayla's hair in the string of braids. As Lee enters the room, Marin realizes that something is wrong. It turns out Lee had been heavily wounded during the struggle. This wound, coupled with the realization of his sister's death, makes him unable to move. Marin begs him to accompany her to the ER, but he's aware his condition will lead to his death. As a final wish, he pleads with her to eat him, bones and all. If she truly loves him, then it would be the easiest thing to do. In a bittersweet moment, they share a final kiss and Marin begins to devour her lover.